This podcast is a work in progress of me getting over perfectionism of the things that I want to do and just doing them. They say going from 0 to 1 is the hardest step, and that's what this is. Last November, I started journaling, not out of a desire to record things, to go look at them later and see that they're perfect and like have a record. It was rather out of a way to process through things and capture what I'm thinking at the time, whether it's like, perfect grammar or super aesthetic or not. And it's really bloomed out since then. I learned that I love the creative process of not setting habits and goals and like being productive creative. But I do love the creative process, as in when I have something on my mind, I'm going to share it in its rawest form and then maybe come back and look at it later. And that's what journaling's turned into. And eventually that bloomed into the Substack. Let's Get Real. That has a few posts now. And as I was writing it, I was thinking I really love doing this and I love podcasting even more. So why don't I put them together and get over my perfectionist impulses and just, use the content I have to make podcasts and maybe do a little more on top of that content. So that's what this is. This is an attempt at a podcast being recorded in the closet of my girlfriend's parents' house in Stillwater, Oklahoma, because it's the best soundstage I have. So I hope you like it. If you do, keep listening for more, and let's get real. For as long as I can remember, every January, my dad and I have taken a 9-hour road trip to the northeastern reaches of Oregon. Our destination is the Imnaha Canyon, home to some hellacious terrain, poisonous rattlesnakes, big old deer, and cattle ranchers whom any flatland Midwesterner would declare out of their minds. And since I was a toddler, our cousins have owned and operated a ranch in Imnaha. At the beginning of each year, my dad and I go up there to help them process their cattle before the calving season starts. But as I've gotten older, I've come to love these trips more and more, and I mostly love them because I get to see family, especially my dad's Uncle Jack, who's lived 85 very, very full years of life and has the stories to back it up. But beyond that, there's something else, and that is that the trips just feel real. The canyon's numerous, 1,000-foot deep draws. They block all cell phone service, all internet reception. So each year when my dad and I pass through Joseph, which is the town just south of Imnaha, and descend into the canyon, I know that I can turn my phone off and leave the constant noise and just tings and ticks of modern society behind. As a college student, I have come to have a structure of life that is pretty much totally dependent on technology. Actually, I don't know if that's the right way to put that. I don't know that it's dependent on technology, but technology makes it run the way it does. If technology didn't exist, it would look completely different. And I'm sure whether you're listening to this as a college student or a middle-aged person or even an older person, your life is pretty dependent on technology. It's in everything you do. For me, my Apple Watch wakes me up at anywhere from 6 to 8 in the morning on my left wrist. And then in combination with my Whoop strap on my right wrist, it tracks morning workouts with sync to a cloud-based calendar with a tracker and a training plan. A separate calendar app tells me when I go to classes and meetings, and the coursework for all of those classes is almost exclusively digital nowadays, accessed through yet another cloud service. So when the day's tasks are over and the devices that did serve as tools end their work, they can probably turn into a time-sucking entertainment device if you let them. And I'm human too. I definitely let them. For me and many others, our phone is probably the first thing and the last thing we look at before we go to bed, because not only are we glued to it as a tool, but it's also an endless form of simple mental stimulus. So Imnaha is fantastic because it forces me and anyone else who dares to enter, leave it all behind. On day one, instead of waking up to an alarm, I rose to the sun shining through a window as it crested a massive peak to the east of my cousin's house. I habitually, when I woke up, reached for my phone, and then I realized that it was powered off in a duffel bag. I think what could be described as a feeling of fear of missing out, FOMO, quickly washed over me. Man, am I going to get a text that I'm going to miss? And then it quickly turned into relief, because rather than checking messages and, not doing something super meaningful when I woke up, I spent the rest of the morning eating breakfast around a table with my family. After our meal, we ended up discussing what the work of the day was going to be, and it quickly reminded me of the difference between simple and easy. Our goal for the day was to gather a few hundred head of cows from the grazing pasture about 3 miles up the road, but due to a recent rain, the steep slopes were way too slippery for horses to traverse, so we would be gathering them what are effectively grassy cliffs, super steep hills, on foot. Simple, not very easy. Me and my cousin, we traveled up a road to the pasture in a Can-Am, and when we stopped at the base of a draw, he told me simple directions. He said, hike to the top, make sure the cow's being pushed across the slope, don't run uphill in the wrong direction. And when I started hiking the slope, it was so steep, I realized this is going to be pretty difficult, because when I started going, if I stood straight up, as much as my ankles would allow me to with my mobility, I could extend my arm less than straight out and grip the clumps of grass in front of me. I quickly turned from walking up the hill to bear crawling up the hill, and it was very, very difficult. Despite over a month of endurance training for a marathon, my heart rate spiked immediately, and I began to drip sweat despite it only being 35 degrees outside. It hurt a lot, but I was going to be darned if I let the cows get by me before I summited the slope. So with an entire body on fire, I finally made that last step to the top. Earlier in the day, I had secured my phone in a vest pocket, knowing that a moment like this with an incredible view could be captured. So when I got to the top, I reached for it, and then I just stopped for a second, and I looked up. And it was one of, if not the most beautiful sights I'd seen at the time. Peru kind of put a cap on that, but Imnaha is gorgeous. There were snow-capped canyon peaks that could be seen at eye level for literally miles and miles. I could see far into Idaho. It was also dead silent, something that very few young Americans, if Americans at all, have experienced during their lifetime. I pulled my hand away from the vest pocket after I looked up, and I just took a seat on the ground, knowing that it was going to be a minute before I needed to look for cows. I wasn't going to let any device or anything else ruin this. My mind entered what is called a state of soft fascination. Soft fascination is where your acute focus, the things that you focus on, the way that you focus on things that you're paying attention to, like reading or writing, doing the dishes, anything like that. When you're in soft fascination, your acute focus shuts completely off and your body just reflects on sensory information. I was looking at the snow-packed mountains. I was feeling a slight breeze on my face. I was listening to pretty much nothing. It was amazing. And as I sat there, I just had the thought, if I could bear crawl to the top of a mountain every day to see something like this, I would do it without question. Eventually, cows came, so I turned them downhill, but before I descended the slope, I ended up pulling my phone out to capture a view to show other people. Over the next few days, we processed all the cows. After the day's tasks were complete, we ate meals together with absolutely no distractions. Instead of, watching TV or scrolling through Instagram or whatever else you would do in your free time at night, we all just sat in a quiet room and talked for hours, mostly every night until midnight or later. Every moment felt real, because there were no distractions, nor layers between myself, my family, and the hands-on work that was marked complete by sights and sounds, not a progress bar. After leaving the world to get uncomfortable for 4 days in Imnaha, I left feeling like I could conquer it. But why? Why does that happen? It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? How could you go from zero connectivity and manual labor in the cold to being motivated, right? It doesn't sound fun. In college, I realized how easy it is to get locked into the bliss of comfort and convenience and just leave challenge and achievement behind. Because contrary to our culture, achieving does not mean, by definition, gaining a high position. It doesn't mean being very wealthy, making lots of money. And it really doesn't mean being popular. The word achievement, by definition, means successfully bring out or reach a desired objective, level, or result by effort, skill, or courage. It means to reach for what you desire. And, that could be anything from a canyon peak to an organized household, or, to be fair, a position or money. But the main point is that effort, skill, and courage are not associated with comfort, convenience, right? Our modern lifestyle makes it too easy to become unwell because it takes us away from that idea of striving through discomfort to achieve. And I think that being unwell, like our society tends us to lean towards, is holding many of us back from achievement. Our lifestyle, it creates unwell bodies and unwell psyches, and both have negative downstream effects. Physically, here's some stats for you. Over 70% of Americans are considered overweight or obese, according to the NIH. Of the leading 10 causes of death in this country, 9 of them are related to obesity through poor nutrition and or lack of exercise. Obesity is shown to take between 5 and 20 years off of lifespan, and even more off of health span, which is the span of your life that you can live without serious assistance from medical care. And from 2000 to 2015, attention spans fell 33%. Nearly 1/3 of adults reported experiencing anxiety in 2023, according to Forbes. Note that is after the pandemic by a lot. Now, I want you, as we think about these stats, to take a moment and think about your lifestyle. Think about the food you eat more specifically. For most Americans, about 50% of our calorie consumption comes from ultra-processed foods. So in other words, 50% of your energy comes from foods that are probably typically smaller, convenient, yet super, super calorically dense, meaning for every gram of food, they have a lot of calories by weight. And they're loaded with things like sugar and fat. Ultra-processed foods, they're addictive, they're nutritionally unbalanced, and they leave us improperly nourished yet still hungry. Now, there's a direct correlation, if you look at it, between high-income countries, ultra-processed foods, and chronic disease. We live in a place that is very high income relative to the rest of the world. We eat a ton of ultra-processed foods, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we lead the world in chronic disease by a lot too. So think about it, like what percentage of your energy comes from ultra-processed foods? Might be more than you think. Now take a moment and think about where you direct your attention, or rather where your attention is being directed. Most Americans, they touch their phones well over 1,000 times per day, which sounds like a crazy number, like 1,000 times per day. But we are constantly experiencing, notifications, music, things that make us reach for it, right? It doesn't seem that crazy once you think about how many times it gets your attention every day. We live in a world where there's barely any silence. And I bet you can't even think of the last time you experienced true silence, like not even the noise of air circulating in your home, right? NIH research shows that there's a direct correlation between noise annoyance, anxiety, and depression. Further research shows anxiety medication prescriptions are given more in areas with high levels of white noise, meaning that noise that comes in the background that you're not really controlling. So think about it. Do you think that your attention span and your mental health take a hit from the devices and the sounds around you? They very well could. Keeping physical and psychological health in mind, here's a question. Would you change your behavior if you knew it was holding you back, potentially even slowly killing you, whether it be the outside in or the inside out? I hope that most people would say yes, because the obvious answer is like, yeah, if I want to live longer, I'll change my behavior. The problem is it's really hard to break out of a comfort cycle. And that's why most people don't change their behavior, and we're in the predicament that we're in. In conclusion, my dad and I's trip to Imnaha was impactful because after living full-time in college, like in a town away from my really rural home area, I realized that modern comfort and convenience is holding us back really in a lot of ways. 4 days of disconnection from technology and moments of true silence left me with physical and mental clarity. That clarity, it created motivation. So think about it. How much could we achieve physically? And that doesn't even mean like, competing in sports. That means like just how healthy and how good could you feel if you pushed your body through discomfort to do some challenging tasks? How much could we achieve in our relationships with our friends and family if we didn't have technological distractions or addictions pulling us away from long conversations? How much creativity and motivation could we achieve if our minds weren't numbed by instantly accessible entertainment? How much do you think you could achieve? I bet it's more than you realize. At the end of this Substack, I don't like giving unsolicited advice, and looking back about 6 months when this was written, this stuff is good, but I'm going to make some modifications. I concluded 5 easy ways that you can get uncomfortable that may lead to achievement. The first one, complete 1 physically challenging task per day outdoors, whether it be 10 push-ups or a marathon. At the time, you can tell I wasn't very far into marathon training because I would never have included this in here by just saying, yeah, go run a marathon. That's a stupid thing to include. But the gist of it is, move your body in a way that you don't do it. Break up the habit, right? Routine in this case is the enemy. Go do something you wouldn't do. Maybe it's 10 push-ups. Maybe it is walking to the nearest gas station or grocery store instead of driving there. Just break it up a little bit. Number 2, if you play music or a podcast during a certain activity, next time, don't do it. You will be amazed how uncomfortable you are, but you will also be amazed where your mind takes you. Next time you order at a restaurant, get water instead of a soft drink. Most of the calories that lead to overnourishment or obesity-causing intake in America is from soft drinks. Get water next time. Stay hydrated. Next time you're alone and go to scroll social media, sit in your bedroom until your mind thinks of something creative or productive. One point in a book I'm about to discuss is that creativity does not come from, being completely optimized in everything. Like, in its essence, you make your life easier in a lot of ways if you're trying to achieve something because you want time to be bored and think. Most of us today just fill our time with things that make us not bored, so break that cycle. Number 5, this evening, set your technological alarm 30 minutes before you go to bed, then don't look at your phone or any other screen until the next morning. Find something you can do to wind down or get bored and see where your mind goes. This is good advice because not only does it, make you get into that state of boredom and maybe creativity, but it's also super good for your sleep. Americans are also chronically underslept. And if you look at a blue screen device or a screen that emits a lot of blue light right before you go to bed, you're going to disrupt your melatonin and you're not going to sleep as well. It's really good for circadian health. More to come on that. At the end of this Substack, I included, this is inspired by a section about that. I read a really great book. It's called Show Your Work. It's by, I believe it's Austin Kleon is his name. Talks a lot about how, as a creator, not only should you share what just what your end product is, but you should also share what led to it, because 99% of the things that you create in your life are they're not on your own. They're inspired by other people's work, even if you don't know it. So his point was if something inspired you to create this, share it. This Substack specifically was inspired by a book called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. It talks a lot about what I talked about in the Substack, but the gist of it is we are so comfortable today that we find ourselves in a point in human history where our progress is harming us at a fundamental level. There's a quote, and I believe it goes something like, if you deny your nature, it will pop up in a rather unkind way. I believe that's the quote. And that's kind of what's happening. It's a great book. Michael Easter tells the story of, being an alcoholic, having way too much comfort in his life to the point where it was literally killing him. And he went on this 30-day hunt in Alaska for caribou where he lived out of a backpack, he lived in a tent, and he was cold all the time. And he said it was the best thing for him. So fantastic book. You should go check that out. I hope you like this Substack. I hope that you can get something from it. My mission here is not to tell you why you should do things that make you a better human being physically and mentally. Rather, I want to make you feel like you want to get better. We face a lot of problems in America. I think my blessing and curse growing up in a very small town is that I'm so close to everything. I was not only able to see the great parts of growing up in a small town and great parts of the world, but I also saw a lot of problems, right? They were right in your face. So I want to make the world a little bit better place, one message at a time. I hope that you go get uncomfortable after listening to this, and I hope that you get some real experiences in. Let's get real.